Having spent 1 week in Caracas organising supplies and getting permits, we then trooped down to Ciudad Bolivar, which is on the river Orinoco. From there we hired 3 planes to the area we intended to go. We had a hell of a lot of luggage, which we had to assemble really down. It was the first time the team all met up. And so then one morning we assembled at the airport and helped them load on stuff, and that was it. We had in all about 1.4 tons of luggage.
Well, I wasn't too sure when I saw the plane. We got on, and I remember the seating arrangements were particularly sort of worrying. Most of the seats were actually sort of becoming detached from their mountings, so you're sitting there.
There were 8 British people, and there were 3 Venezuelan students who were going to join us later, as they couldn't get their permits in time.
From far away it looks good, but if you look closely at the bolts holding the wings together, they're sort of shaking and loose. So it was quite slightly nerve-wracking, to say the least.
I mean, I was nervous about the plane, especially when it was juddering.
It was just a sea of jungles, completely flat, extending for miles and miles. And then suddenly on the horizon there was one of these tabletop mountains. And I think we all had a sort of image in our minds of what we might expect one of these to look like. But it was, I don't know, I think it surpassed all our imaginings. I had vague memories of seeing something vaguely like that on the old 1950s Conan Doyle film of Conan Doyle's The Lost World. So it lived up to my expectations.
I'd seen quite a few mountains in the Himalayas, but none of them had ever been flat on top in the same way, and none of them were surrounded by this incredible sheer cliffs on all sides, and some of them overhanging cliffs.
So the flight took about 3 hours, but that's winding our way round these tabletop mountains. You can't just fly straight by any means.
God, they're all...
One strange thing was that we'd never really seen all the luggage piled up, concentrated in one spot before until then. And just suddenly seeing it in one enormous mound in the middle of the airstrip was quite a daunting thing to see. From the airfield to the river, it wasn't more than about a quarter of a mile.
And then we had to negotiate the boat journey and the hiring of Indians, basically employing them for a month. One of them had their own boat. Basically, the chief of the village brought what was the largest dugout canoe, which they called curiaras, which could just about take all our luggage and our food.
We managed to get it loaded up in the end.
Because our original project was to climb an unclimbed mountain, which was about 60 kilometres via the river journey. So we had to go first north, down a quite large river, and then what we proposed to do was to go up a much smaller river upstream, which was where we intended to establish the base camp.
There were several sets of rapids along the river. Most of the time the boats were too heavily laden to be able to go across fully loaded, so we'd have to moor at the bank before the set of rapids, take everything out. The whole process would take perhaps an hour, so it was quite a laborious thing to do. The second set of rapids we came across, before we knew it, we were actually riding straight across them, and that was quite an exhilarating experience.
It was enjoyable to watch the boat going over the rapids. I was fairly confident about the Indians, their ability to get the boat through.
Travelling by river is by far the nicest way of travelling in the jungle, because you've constantly got a breeze cooling you off, and at the same time you can sunbathe, and you're never pestered by insects as you are walking. Shooting under jungle conditions is incredibly difficult. I don't think you can actually take very many close-ups of wildlife while you're going along, because you're going so fast. But on the other hand, it's very nice motion to get an impression of the jungle. I enjoyed pulling the boat up the rapids quite a lot. That was quite fun. You were in this really fast-flowing water that you wouldn't be able to stand in unless you had something like a boat to hold on to. And we quite often did it together with the Indians once we realised exactly how they did it. And that was typical of a lot of our activities.
At the end of the river journey, we'd reached near the base of the mountain that we wanted to climb. So that was where we established our base camp. The Indians chose the site for base camp, and within 3 hours they'd rigged up this wooden sort of scaffolding.
I was quite surprised at the intricacy of the whole construction. I mean, as we were building it, we really got to feel a very real respect for the Indians and how much in tune with the environment they were, how they knew how to use different materials from the rainforest.
And we brought plastic with us, which is sort of essential to keep out the rains, and it really did rain.
So it was really a very comfortable camp. We rigged up our hammocks. Took us a while. We hadn't really spent much time in hammocks before this, so it took a while to get used to the subtleties of sleeping in a hammock. But we settled in quite nicely, and we had a comfortable time there.
Collecting plants was a very, very important part of our expedition. The local Indians have an incredible knowledge of their environment, and they're aware of what plants are potentially useful for medicinal purposes or for glues, for toxins or anything of that sort.
Much of this area, which is called the Grand Savannah, is made up of a combination of jungle and then small pockets of savanna. We saw this DC-3, Dakota, looking, at first it looked as if it had crashed, but I think in the end we decided it had actually just been dumped there.
It was very strange wandering around the plane and recognising exactly the same instruments that we were flying in just a few days earlier. We were really wondering whether we were very lucky that our plane didn't end up like that as well.
So you could either take... I was in fact in charge of the pressing of plants. The Venezuelan students whom we had with us, there's one anthropologist and 2 biologists, so they all had some experience in plant collecting. We were sort of carefully briefed on the whole matter by people in Caracas, and I'd never been aware of the whole intricacies of it before. The idea there was particularly to collect from the tops of the tepuis, because they're so isolated from the surrounding rainforest. They're rather like islands, and rather like the Galapagos Islands in some ways. Well, at least that was the theory. The theory was that we may well find particular species on tops of particular tepuis, which you might not be able to find elsewhere. Top, you sort of hope for the best now. It's not really about it. And then while you're preparing the next one, just...
While Daniel was lecturing to the 2 Venezuelan students on his great knowledge of plant pressing, we had to organise with the Indians to set about exploring round to the north of the mountain.
Okay, so we arrived in Camarata. So we've come down from Camarata here, down the Rio Acanam, heading north, and then we've come up the Rio Aparaman. Now the first tepui we passed was Amarawai. The second is Parapue that we're interested in. So we've got a base camp here, beside the river. Well, we know there's a hunting trail, at least as far as between the 2 tepuis. And the thing is to then try and get the Indians to take us roundabout and then hace una pica up towards the base of the cliff. And then we'll just have to see if there's a route up.
Often you're walking in mud through very thick vegetation with spines. So it's an extremely exhausting thing to do. And even 3 hours of walking like that is far more exhausting than a whole day of maybe trekking in the mountainous area.
One has to mark one's way when everyone's going through the jungle, otherwise you can just get completely lost. And to do that, what you do is you cut a small bit of bark off trees at intervals. We started doing it every 5 yards. The Indians generally do it something like every 40 or 50 yards because they can see a trail where no trail appears to go.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, completely. Want to go off that way?
Ooh.
The Indians brought us to the base of the cliff. From there on, it was our turn to sort of show off, really, if we could. So it was Paul who actually set about doing the climb, and he was at times hanging off great, huge plants that stick straight out of the side of the wall. And after quite an effort, with the insects and the heat, you got incredibly dirty. The wall itself, at that point, which was the shortest on the whole around the whole Tepuy, was about 70 metres.
I mean, there's mud everywhere. You hold yourself up holding onto tree trunks, and mud would just fall down, drip down from overhanging banks onto your head. But and you had to tolerate getting very, very dirty, very muddy and sticky and bitten as you went up.
And I was savouring every second of it. The view is quite incredible.
I mean, we had quite a lot of equipment to get up. So climbing up from the base to the summit involved all of us doing two or three trips hauling up kit bags. So it took an entire day to get up.
When in fact we couldn't haul it up, we tried hauling it and that was impossible. So we had to use special equipment to actually climb up the rope with kit bags hanging between our legs.
I had to climb it 3 times with equipment, trying various methods of getting the equipment up. The first time I climbed up the rope with the rucksack, and then the second time I climbed the actual climbing route with a kit bag over my back. And then the third time I climbed up the rope again with a kit bag. So when I got to the top, it was just getting dark, and David was waiting at the top to help me, and the others were setting up camp. And I was absolutely shattered.
The big problem was, once we got to the top and we were far from home and dry, we actually had to find a flat area to set up a camp.
We must have spent from about 6 o'clock in the morning till 7 at night or so on the go.
The mountain had never been climbed before, so everywhere we stood was new to man. That was what was really exciting about it.
What are they?
It was a turkey vulture. And the next day, we set off through the jungle on top, which was, for the most part, very thick.
We knew that there must be some jungle on top because we could see from the side, from the savannah near our base camp, we could see a sort of silhouette of the jungle up the steep slope and then on the top. Just by pure chance, we hit a river going due east, although we were going south. So we followed the river. We went along a flat riverbed, which got wider and wider, and then every now and then you'd get to a waterfall, and the waterfalls got progressively larger until the last few waterfalls were maybe 80 feet high, and we were constantly expecting to come to the cliff edge and see an amazing panoramic view. And then we got to sort of corner, and we were wondering, is this going to be the edge? And we walked past the corner, and then we saw this enormous door leading out to a fantastic view of the surrounding area. Then we looked over the side of the waterfall to the sea of jungle below. That was the most exhilarating part of the expedition.
We hadn't really sort of expected anything like the kind of spectacular waterfall we did find. It's just this enormous drop, a huge airy space below, and the river just plummeting down. And there's an enormous roar, and you couldn't really hear yourself speak. We were jumping around, shouting, but we were just drowned out by the sound of
I think the expedition was very successful because we outlined 3 aims that we wanted to do, and we achieved those as well as we could.
We managed to climb a previously unclimbed mountain, survey the top and discover a really quite charming river, which is more like a Japanese garden than anything else.
Everything was suddenly all worthwhile when we finally got to the waterfall and just had this incredible, spectacular view.
One thing for sure, I'll remember it.
It was fantastic.
It's a great summer.
You have